The Congressional Budget Office, meanwhile, is projecting the big, beautiful bill will increase the federal debt by $5 trillion if the temporary tax cuts are extended the full 10 years. Those provisions include no tax on tips or overtime, tax deductions for senior citizens, and deductions on auto loans for new U.S.-made cars. The CBO writes this: as a result of net of any changes in borrowing for federal credit programs, CBO estimates that debt held by the public at the end of 2034 would increase by 11.5 percentage points relative to the agency's January 2025 projection of GDP. Joining me now is the president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, Maya MacGuineas. Maya, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And you made these warnings significantly, loudly, and often before the bill was signed. Your reaction to what you're expecting on the bill with its impact on debt?
Right. Unfortunately, the Congressional Budget Office is confirming what anybody who was looking at the overall numbers on the bill has known for quite some time, which is this is going to add trillions of dollars to the national debt at a time where we can hardly afford to add more borrowing to our already huge structural deficits and increases in the debt.
Yeah.
And what this really emphasizes is that a lot of parts of the bill are set to expire. And that doesn't make any sense. That's why we got in this situation in the first place, because we had expiring tax cuts. Tax cuts make a lot more sense if they're permanent. But when you start to look at the bill with those costs, $5 trillion is an astounding price tag at a moment when we should be borrowing less, not more.
President Trump often talks about growth being a priority for him, and I'm wondering if the economists at the CBO are not looking at the potential for real significant growth. Maya, particularly at this moment in time where we've got artificial intelligence driving so much. I mean, the pivot to AI is being talked about as an iPhone moment, as a dot-com moment, because it's going to add so much growth. Are you expecting that growth to materialize, and are you looking at that as a partial way to pay for this or not?
Huge bump ups in productivity growth from AI or anything else would be welcome and are certainly possible. The AI boom is real, and I think we're going to see a lot of growth that does come from that. But you cannot pin your hopes on sort of growing our way out of this problem, this structural problem, because one, what comes along with changes from AI may also have some downside, whether it's huge disruptions in the job market or more widespread disinformation. There are a lot of costs that may also go with that. And two, the timing of this could be different. It could be that we start to see those productivity increases in the very short term, but it also could take years. And we know we have structural imbalances. We need to make sure that we are not spending as a share of GDP in a way that's growing year after year, which is what we're doing now, and at the same time cutting taxes, which means there's less to finance that. So we have to deal with the structural imbalances while doing everything to promote economic growth. And CBO and others have looked at the likely growth effects of this bill. The problem, Maria, is that while tax cuts and the other policies may improve economic growth, higher levels of debt bring down that growth. And so that depletes what kind of growth you might have hoped for if we hadn't borrowed for this bill in the first place.
Well, I mean, what about the tariff revenue? I mean, you know, there's that as well. I spoke with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about this just last week. Watch this.
Well, we're closing in on $100 billion. I think we could annualize at $300 billion. So a way to think about that is that's roughly 1% of our U.S. 30 trillion GDP. So, you know, that is a big number, Maria, and we didn't get any credit for that in the CBO scoring. You know, I don't agree with the CBO scoring, but, you know, CBO scoring did say that there's a chance over the 10-year window we could take in $2.8 trillion of tariff revenue. And the great thing about the June number was not only was it an increase in tariff revenue, we brought down expenses. So it was a great combination: lower expenses, higher revenues, and that's how we are going to get this budget mess that we were left with under control.
So, Maya, what about that? Again, the CBO, is it looking at the tariff revenue? Because the Treasury Department reported that the U.S. collected $29 billion in tariff revenue just last month. That's up $1 billion from June. It's setting a new monthly record. The Commerce Department also showed that the trade deficit has reached its lowest level since September 2023. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer was on this program on Friday talking about these new numbers. Here's what he said. Watch.
So we're already well over 150 billion in revenues so far. And remember, we've only really had tariffs in place for a few months, and they're escalating now. You know, we expect this year it'll be several hundred billion, and next year it'll be even more than that. I mean, this is a real revenue stream. Remember, the president's goal here is to reduce the trade deficit and to reshore manufacturing, and to really use tariffs as a tool of trade policy and economic policy like it's meant to be used. So he's really just country by country going through, and he's hitting the sweet spot with each one.
So what do you say to all of that, Maya?
Absolutely. The tariff revenue is the bright spot in this fiscal picture overall. We are seeing record levels of new revenue coming in from the tariffs, and that will certainly not offset the costs of the big tax cuts, but it will make an important contribution depending on how long they're in place. So there are a couple things to keep in mind. One, there has been talk about giving the tariff revenue away, sort of as dividends or sovereign wealth fund or whatever. That would take away the deficit effect. So I hope that they will keep that revenue in place to really address the deficit. I think that should be the #1 fiscal priority. Number two, we don't know whether the tariffs will be permanent or not, but we are on track to see real improvements in the revenue from tariffs so far. That would help, not offset at all. If that collected 2 or 3 trillion, you'd still be left with a multi-trillion-dollar gap, but that would make a big, big difference. One thing to keep in mind about the CBO is the reason they weren't scored as part of the bill is they weren't part of the bill. They were separate, so they have been scored separately. And CBO looks at those numbers and does make estimates. It's just you only include in a score what's in the actual law that's being passed at the time. So the scoring makes sense. The overall fiscal effects still look like we're on track to add trillions of dollars to the debt, but if tariffs stay in place and are permanent, that would mitigate that by 2 to 3 trillion. It looks like from the numbers right now.
Right. Well, you've done incredible work on all of this, Maya, and we appreciate your input. But Ashley, what about that? What about the tariff revenue and all these other areas that, you know, raise questions about the CBO? That's why Besant and others say they don't trust the CBO numbers.
Well, absolutely. And Maya, you guys do yeoman's work in Washington and get criticized on every side of the aisle. So thank you for your hard work. But yes, what the president said about giving away money, the tariff money, was potentially giving a portion away to the American people to help them in their everyday lives. But the majority of it would go to the debt. And I think that's very important to clarify. But in this time of Washington needing modernized, especially some of these various agencies or parts of agencies that deal with the financial markets, if you had anything that you could modernize at the CBO, which I think there's a lot, what would you say?
Oh, I think that a lot of the input that's coming on right now will help the CBO. I think opening up those models so people understand what's going in and what's not is really helpful. In fact, they have something called rules of thumb where people can look in and see how different scenarios are affected. I think that's very useful. And so right now what we have is a lot of outside scores, which CBO looks at, sees what they are projecting compared to what the CBO does. And I think we should go back then and look at what the numbers that actually came in are. So if you look at last time there were tax cuts in 2017, once adjusted for inflation and one anomaly year in 2022, CBO score was really close to what ultimately happened. We have no idea if that was from the tax cuts or not. There was a big pandemic in between. But I think being able to go back and evaluate what happened compared to the scores of both the CBO and outside estimators is really useful, and we can keep learning and updating the models. I think the work of CBO is incredibly important because it is not a political institution, and we have to have honest scorekeepers. My experience with them is they are not political at all, so I'm very appreciative of the numbers they put out.
And Maya, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, said that he's hoping to do more reconciliation packages. What would be your advice in terms of areas to cut spending right now?
Yeah, we need another reconciliation package. And what I really think it should shoot for is bringing the offsets down to the level that the House originally requested. So the amount of savings that they generated was about $600 billion short from what the House had said it was going to insist on. There are a lot of members who are very concerned about the damaging fiscal effects of this bill. There are a lot of areas we could reduce spending. The biggest one, you can't do Social Security and reconciliation, which is something we have to address.
Yep.
In fact, as a result of this bill, it will be insolvent 1 year sooner, and only 7 years. Medicare. We really have to get savings in Medicare, and there's actually more areas of Medicaid that we could look at. They did some important improvements, but there's more to be done. But Medicare is probably the most promising area for savings in the immediate term, and there's some bipartisan options.
Yep. Maya, great to talk with you. Thanks so much. Maya MacGuineas with the latest there.